Hi, I'm Charles with East Texas Historical Fencing, and continuing our series on the basics of rapier, we're going to start with explaining what the rapier is. We're going to talk about the different parts of the sword. We're going to talk about how to grip the sword and considerations on grip, and we will finally end with muscle group engagement on how to grip your sword properly without giving yourself unnecessary fatigue. So, to start off, we have the side sword. The side sword was very popular in the 16th century, 1500s, both Germany and Italy. And it is a very, very heavy cut and thrust weapon. It does both very well. And over time, and through civilian dueling, and through just popularity, and through different things just like style and what people preferred, the rapier, or the early rapier, like this one here, became much more popular amongst civilian dueling and just kind of showing off and wearing. And as time went on, there were multiple different styles. You had cup hilt rapiers like this one, and you had super late period dish hilt rapiers, transitional rapiers like this one, and other styles like Pappenheimer or just clamshell rapiers. What's important about the rapier are different parts of the sword. Just like every other sword, it's all broken up in the same way. I understand that within the Spanish system they have 12 parts of the blade, but I am an Italian fencer at heart and in basis, so we're only going to go over the basic 3 parts of the blade. So we have the weak. The weak is from here to about right here. If you take your sword and you smack it like this, it will vibrate through the air, and there is a point of percussion. Anybody who does test cutting knows that the point of percussion is usually the place where the most optimal place to cut with your sword. It also happens to be where the mid of the sword ends and where the weak begins. Other names for this in Italian are like debole. In English, it's called the foible, but for our purposes, we'll just refer to it as the weak. In the middle, we have the mid of the blade here, and then from the mid and down, we have the strong of the blade. Now here we have the guard, we have the grip, and we have the pommel. And you'll notice on this particular sword, the quillons, or quillons, or quillions, or however you would like to pronounce it, this has what's called S-curve quillons, like this, which means that they don't stick straight out. This is a stylistic choice, and it does things to your fencing that you must be aware of that we'll talk about later. You notice on this sword, we have long, straight quillons, like this. This changes the way that you engage your guard as well, and we'll talk about that later. When we talk about the rapier, we have to start with how do we grip the sword. So there are a few grips for rapier, depending on the length of the grip or the style of rapier that you choose. I talked about in my first video how this was going to be a general lesson that basically anybody from any tradition of rapier could do, but when it comes to grip considerations and what style of rapier that you want to do, we start having to itemize in regards to what style that we're talking about. Having a baseline of Italian fencing, most of the terms and the preferences that I'm going to have are going to be in reference to Italian fencing specifically. So if you prefer the Spanish or French systems, this will not be an unhelpful video for you, but it may not be specifically what you're looking for. First, we'll start with what we call the standard Italian grip, or just the standard grip. You use this in side sword and in other rapiers. So what this is going to be, we're going to start with, our hand will be out. We will make a finger gun like this, and we will place our sword through the finger gun. We will put our finger through this first ring, and we'll brace our thumb on the back side of this blade. This section of the blade, both in the side sword and in the rapier, is referred to as the ricasso. In the future, I will say you'll be bracing your fingers on the ricasso. Your hand will grip across like this, your fingers will grip, and you will create what's known as this obtuse angle here between your blade and your forearm like this. Now what this gets you is that as you hold your guard forward, you're able to easily cut and thrust through your actions however you need to. Now, what this does create, if you ever need to extend your guard like this, you will notice that my wrist breaks and there is an uneven line here. This causes tension in my wrist and causes tension in the backside of my elbow. This will give you tendonitis and tennis elbow very quickly. So we want to avoid any position that forces our wrists down like this. So an early period rapier and with the standard grip, we solve that by our guard always being palm up or palm down in a resting position when we extend. And when we choose to be in third guard or first guard like this, which we'll go over in a later video, you'll notice that the angle returns to my wrist here. So when our palm is up, our wrist is not broken. When our palm is down, our wrist is not broken. Now, the grip that I prefer, because I like to do a little bit later period rapier, we take that same hand and we use 2 fingers and we brace our back fingers and we rest our thumb and our forefinger and pinch the ricasso, and we hard grip with our middle finger like this. Now, you'll notice the pommel now rests in the middle of my forearm and touches, and I am now able to extend my sword in such a way that I'm no longer breaking my wrist. And when I turn my guard, I no longer have to angle at my shoulder like this. I can angle directly in front of me without having to do anything terribly drastic in moving my body. Now, what this does for my grip is that I can't cut well like this unless I transition my grip back. I cannot cut well, but I have much finer point control. For the later period rapier system that I prefer, this is a better grip in my opinion. If you prefer an early period rapier system, then that standard grip that we talked about the first is going to be best for you. A further note on grip consideration, the sword that you purchase or the sword that's available to you to train with will also have a lot to do with what grip you prefer to use. So this is my personal sword. I've done a lot of work to design how this sword is shaped and how long the grip is and the weight and the distribution and all those things. And the way I choose to grip my sword, you notice my pommel fits very perfectly here in the center of my wrist, right here in this divot, like this. And I'm able to grip my sword the way that I want. And I can do things like this and things like this, and it never gets in my way because the grip is exactly the length that I want. However, if I choose, say, a sword from an American manufacturer like Darkwood, notice how much longer this grip is. If I grip my sword the same way, now look, my pommel is all the way back here in my wrist, and I can no longer do the things that I want because of the length of the pommel. But if I transition to that normal grip, suddenly the length of the pommel and the length of the handle is no longer a negative consideration. So when you purchase a sword and you see me doing something very specific with my sword and you say, I would like to do that, but you notice this sword is a different size and it's not optimized for the thing that I'm doing. So when you purchase your own sword, you need to understand what is it that you like to do, what kind of fencing would you like to do, and try and make that consideration before you purchase your first sword. But if you're using a club sword or you're borrowing a sword, then the unfortunate reality is you have to do what fits the hand. Don't try to force something where it does not fit. To begin learning with rapier, after we've learned how to grip the sword, we have to then know which muscle groups to engage properly so that we don't give ourselves unnecessary fatigue. You'll notice when you start training rapier, or really any sword, you'll find yourself having a lot of soreness and fatigue in your forearm and sometimes in your shoulder and in your chest, and maybe sometimes often in your wrist and your elbow. What we don't want is we don't want people to be discouraged from learning the art because of some sort of soreness and fatigue that never seems to go away. So if we first learn how to properly engage the correct muscle groups, we can alleviate that and mitigate that pain as much as humanly possible. So the first thing we're going to do with that is we're going to learn how to hold a proper guard in rapier and what muscles to engage and when. In the first video, you'll remember our basic fencing stance. We get into our basic fencing stance in this way, and our hand is out here. We're going to grip our sword in whichever grip that you prefer. I'm going to use my grip, and I'm going to hold my sword straight out in front of me like this. If you're in that standard grip, your grip will be palm up, remember, so that you don't break your wrist. So I'm in this standard grip like this, and what I'm going to do is all the way extended, I'm going to, like a corkscrew, turn my elbow back into my body, and I'm going to put my elbow right here on my liver, and I'm going to tuck my shoulder in really tight, and now I'm in this super awkward position. If you were in fourth guard, instead of turning your guard, you're going to just come straight back like this, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to tuck your shoulder, and you're going to tuck your arm straight into your kidney. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to lower your forearm with your body to where it's parallel with the ground, and you're going to keep your elbow tucked into your body, and you're going to push straight forward like this. And if you're going to be in that standard grip, this is going to be your basic guard. If you're going to be in the grip that I have, you're going to turn it back into third guard like this, or where your quillins are straight up and down like this, and this will be your basic guard. What's important about this guard is while I'm in this static position, I am squeezing here at my shoulder and my back is open. And so I'm not putting any stress here on my forearm, on my wrist, or on my elbow. So when we talk about muscle engagement, obviously fencing is a mobile sport. We're not going to stand still and stare at each other on guard. There's going to be points where you have to move your sword forwards and backwards. So while we're on that guard that we just learned how to do, there's going to be a point where as you extend your sword, your shoulder will close. You will squeeze your shoulder together and your back will open. And your guard will be extended. If you retract your guard back, your shoulder will open and you'll continue to squeeze and your back will then close. If you retract your guard backwards as though you're going to cut, your shoulder will open and your back will then close and squeeze at the shoulder blade. And if you move back forward, you create that relationship back and forth with a thrust, with a cut. Either are the same. The muscle engagement is exactly the same. What we don't want is often people do the entire thing from the wrist, and you'll see them fling the blade out and they'll cut like this only in the wrist. Wrist cuts are not incorrect, but if it's the only thing that you're doing or you're trying to engage the rest of your body, if you begin the action at your wrist, it will only ever be a wrist cut. Even if you feel yourself turning your hips and moving your shoulders, if you begin the action in the wrist, it will only ever be a wrist cut. And the same goes for a thrust as well. If I fling my sword forward like this and attempt to engage the rest of my body, I've broken that chain of kinetic chain because I'm now only engaging my wrist. So we want to start by extending our sword and torquing our hips together so that when I squeeze here with my shoulder and open my back and extend and turn my hips into the action, I'm now delivering the force of my full body, of my whole skeletal structure, and all of my muscle groups together instead of one muscle group or one joint at a time. When it comes to muscle engagement, what we're attempting to do here is we're attempting to do one action at a time, but multiple things have to work together in tandem and in order to make this action as efficient as possible. So take, for instance, a basic lunge. So when I go to lunge with my sword, if you remember from the first video, we have an order in which we do this. We extend our sword, we hinge at our hips, and we step forward like this. You'll notice my hand goes back, my body twists, and everything goes at a certain order so that it doesn't look like this, where I break the action altogether. It really turns into this, where I do everything in a kinetic chain together in order to thrust as efficiently as I possibly can. We don't want to break our actions apart because every time we break an action and continue the action, wherever the broken action ends and a new action begins is when the full action begins again. So if I extend my sword and I leave it and I don't do anything and then I hinge my hips and I stop and then I step, the action begins at the step. And the extension of my sword and the hinge of my hips no longer matters to the step that I just created. One of the most important aspects of fencing, all fencing, is hip engagement, especially in an art that passes often. Now you remember I talked about in Rapier, we pass with grapevine steps, like this. And sometimes we do turn all the way on the hips, but most of the time, because our sword is in our right hand or in our dominant hand, if we're turned around this way, there's very difficult to engage the sword when we're trying to do stuff like this. So some things that we can do to force ourselves to engage our hips. What we're going to do is we're going to take our basic fencing stance, and I'm going to take my non-dominant hand, in my case my left hand, I'm going to place it on my dominant arm shoulder, in this case my right arm, and I'm going to do a basic X cut like this, and cut side to side like this. And what you'll notice is if I leave my hand down, I can make that X cut without doing anything. I can do the entire thing from my shoulder or from my arm. But when I take my hand and I place it on my shoulder, or I grab here at my shirt, I can no longer move my hands side to side without my hips being engaged. So when we do this dramatically, you'll notice my feet turn on both directions like this, the farther and the harder that I'm swinging. So you can also take your hand and place it on your wrist to create the same relationship, and it forces you to turn your hips and to turn your leg and to turn your body into the action that you're doing. If you stand completely still, you can cut this way, but this will never be able to replace the strength, efficiency, and power as this, as a cut like this, or like this. So, in order to engage your hips, start by grabbing your wrist, grabbing your shoulder, and just moving back and forth, and get used to how this feels.